Hi and welcome back to Science and Sports. Today I'm joined by Dr. Ron McKeefery, a global leader in strength and conditioning, former NFL strength and conditioning coach, international educator, and currently the special assistant to the head coach at Alabama football. Have fun in today's episode, and if you enjoy the show, please follow the show, comment, and share it to your friends so you will never miss a new episode. TeamBuilder is the online strength and conditioning software for performance coaches that allows you to create training programs and track progress over time for things like max back squat, jump height, or any other KPI that you collect. The free-form programming features allow you to brand and design your programs so athletes can complete them at their own pace or get extra rehab work in. The force plate and VBT integrations allow coaches to easily track KPIs that are critical for all sports. TeamBuilder Strength is currently offering a 30-day free trial when you sign up with the code EURO. Head to teambuilder.com and sign up with promo code EURO to access this exclusive offer. Welcome back to Science and Sports, ladies and gentlemen. My today's guest is a man who goes synonymous with elite athlete development and worked in all areas from the NFL to college level football. Dr. McKeefery. Hi, Ron.
Hey, Simon. How you doing today? Good to be here.
Thank you very much for joining me today. I'm really happy that it worked out that we can talk a little bit today. I mentioned to you before we started, I sadly couldn't make the Congress by the IUSCA, so I'm very happy that we can talk right now today. How are you doing? How is the work going in the United States for you at the moment?
Yeah, it's great. This is starting. It's a kind of a downtime right now, but picking up very
Mhm.
fastly. And and I'm doing a lot more things from a content creation and consulting standpoint. So that's been picking up quite a bit as well. So staying busy, but 30 years of doing this business. I try to take advantage of the rest.
For sure. You you have been a former football player yourself, right?
Correct.
After your playing career was over, how did you, or during your playing career, maybe it was the case for me, but how did you, what's the reason behind your pursue in strength and conditioning? And then maybe like a little background check of yourself. How did you end up in those amazing teams where you coached at? Also in the elite levels in the private sector, how did it all go about?
Yeah, I started off. I grew up single parent, 5 kids, and I grew up pretty you know lower class. I guess I should say is the
Hmm.
best way to say that. And so my friends, in school, my teammates from sports, a lot of their parents were doctors and lawyers and different things, and I saw how they lived, and so originally I went to school to be a doctor. And I did not have good grades coming out of high school, but I took college very seriously, and did well. But got really researching medicine, and the combination of being working with sport and medicine. Really the only kind of pathway was kind of orthopedic surgery, and I didn't really want to cut on people. I didn't enjoy that part of it. And so then I looked at physical therapy, and that was really kind of centered around, especially almost 30 years ago now, was really more focused on kind of just the general population, and again, not too many people were just solely focused on athletes at the time. And so one of my professors mentioned strength and conditioning, and it was an emerging field, but not nearly what it is today. Um, and it just made a ton of sense. Here's this the ability to kind of blend science and sport together, and stay around the football field, which essentially raised me. And so that was a no brainer. And I had a hard time. I went to a small school, so I had a hard time finding different GA jobs and things like that. And so, um, I ended up getting a internship with the Kansas City Royals, which was professional baseball.
Mhm.
And I think the lesson there is just, when you're a young coach, reaching out. There's a lot of people out there that want to help you. Um, and there's a lot of young coaches that have an ambition and a passion, that if you just give them an opportunity, they're going to make the most of it. And that's exactly what I did. I did well with the Kansas City Royals. That led to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is in the NFL.
Mhm.
Um, Working with them, that led to becoming a head strength coach at 22 years old with the Berlin Thunder over in NFL Europe in Germany. And
Mhm.
I know a lot of your listeners are German as well, and so great experience for me to think about strength and conditioning from a global perspective. I think anytime you just kind of focus on just your, being domestic or your area, you don't see the opportunity that exists all around the world, and the world is shrinking, as we all know. And so that was big. From there, I came back. That was only a seasonal job. I went back to working for the Buccaneers for a little bit, and then that led into a college opportunity and at South Florida, which went to Army Special Forces, which went to University of Tennessee and Cincinnati Bengals, Eastern Michigan, Fresno State, Washington, and then Alabama. And I think probably the takeaway message, I think, in all those opportunities is I always made the most of where I was at. I never looked for the next job. I really did a good job of just trying to make myself indispensable where my feet were, and
Mhm.
and do a good job. Now keep an eye open for opportunity. Um, but then with every opportunity, each of those opportunities was kind of a calculated risk. They weren't slam dunks. Going to NFL Europe when I was already in the NFL, well, might have been better to stay in the NFL, but this was an opportunity to become a head strength coach, and to have something, um, a unique experience to talk about on my resume for the rest of my career, having worked in Europe. And so I think, being strategic, making smart choices, but, challenging yourself to kind of step outside your comfort zone. That's what leads to growth. That's what leads to opportunity. And I think that I did that throughout my career. Now I think, really having wrote the book, The CEO Strength Coach, and really living by the framework of that, being a great technician, a great manager, and a great entrepreneur. Um, Now I'm really leaning into the entrepreneurial side of that, and really focused on how do I take all this experience and share it with um, the strength and conditioning community. And so that's been a lot of my focus lately. But yeah, it's a long career to try to sum up in 2 minutes there, but that's kind of what it is.
That's for sure. I wanted to ask you one more question about your time in Europe, in Berlin. Not because I'm German, just because I'm interested in your experience there. You said you were 22 years old when you made the move to Germany to become the head strength and conditioning coach. Was it something for you when you look back at it to you would 100% do it again every time again? Or would you say it was a nice experience, I learned a lot, but I would take a different route?
No, 100%. I would do it again. I
Mhm.
thought, it was, growing in responsibility. I was an assistant with, Tampa Bay, and then I became a head strength coach. So that, there was all the learning curve that came with that. You add in the fact that it was in a different country. Um, but I also think just that even though, that was a seasonal job and it was only about 5 total months, it's become this conversation piece that I've been able to use for 30 years. Anytime somebody sees that I had coached in Germany or NFL Europe or whatever on my resume, that creates a conversation. And I think when you're trying to separate yourself in a crowded marketplace, anything that becomes unique or interesting stands out in a big way. So I think, I would 100% do that. And then on top of that, I think what that did for me in my life was to look at the world a little bit differently, right? When all of a sudden you go and you live a different culture and you're around different people, some of these conflicts that our country has with other countries, you start to have more empathy for
Hmm.
different perspectives. You start to see the world in a different way, and that led to me adopting our three kids from a different country. That led to me working with different teams around the world. That led to me doing a podcast for 7 years and talking to coaches all around the world, and knowing that I can learn from people um, in all these different sports that maybe aren't as interesting, in the United States as they are in other countries. And so I think that it gives you a different perspective to really come back and look at your own field in a different way.
Yeah, that's that's for sure. Before I want to move on a little bit to your current work at Alabama, one more question that came into my mind about the Berlin stay for you. Was it hard that you were only 22 years old at the time and you had to coach, or you had the responsibility for players much older than you? So to form it in another way, when I started, I was in the youth program a little bit for my hockey team, and then in my current team now, I'm there for 3 maybe 4 years now, and we had a we had a couple of guys and 30s, a couple of younger guys, then the import guys from North America, and I'm there like the new young strength and conditioning coach, and I have to prove myself. How was it for you? And can you share some tips and tricks for also maybe younger coaches who are in this situation, who want to not control the room, but to make themselves like a name, to build the trust and everything?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. What I would tell young coaches is that a lot of times you fall into one of two camps when you're a young coach. Either you're vulnerable, or you're not as confident because you're young and you're working with maybe older athletes, and so you struggle, and sometimes you overcoach, or you try to be somebody you're not in that
Hmm.
situation. Or you're still trying to be a kid yourself and you're acting like a kid and you're not preparing like a head strength coach. For me, I was really diligent about the opportunities that I had leading up to that, really learning what it meant to be a head strength coach. Being an assistant was never really a goal for me. I'd always looked at it as being a head strength coach because I wanted the culture, I wanted the program, I wanted all the things to end with me. And so I made a real conscious choice early on to carry myself like an older coach, and so when athletes would maybe call me by my first name, I would correct them and make sure that they said Coach Mac. Now, instead of saying, "Hey, call me Coach McKeefery," or whatever, I came up with kind of the shortened kind of
Hmm.
Mac, so that way if they did call me Mac, it wasn't disrespectful. It was
Yeah.
just But I think, what I also did is I made sure that I carried myself and prepared myself so that when I did get an opportunity, my education, my experience, and my presence would speak for me. And I
Yeah.
think that's the one thing about athletes. Athletes don't care how old you are. They don't care, what you look like. They don't care. But if you can, they only care about if you can make them better. And as long
Hmm.
as you lean into that, then they'll support you regardless of your age. And my experience being with professional sport is if you're in that building, typically everybody knows that those people are good at what they do or they wouldn't be in that building,
Yeah.
and regardless of age, I think that's the case. But you only get in that building if you've done the legwork on the front end to prepare yourself to be, you know, ready for that opportunity.
Yeah. I think if you put in, additionally to what you said, if you put in the work and the hours and you prepare your program and you have the right answers for your players, then the trust will, doesn't matter how old you are, probably come by itself or come easier at you. So if you're just one leg in, one leg out, it's probably really, really tough for you to really get going. But yeah, I'm there with you. If you put in the work and if you build yourself this standpoint of maybe not knowledge, but that you actually there for the players, and if they feel it then as well, then I think it's easier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think what you're saying about one leg in and one leg out, I think that can be where my experience, having mentored a lot of coaches, a lot of coaches, they want to have one leg in, being professional and buttoned up and having respect and doing all, and having responsibility, but they also want that other leg to be still being young and having fun and being a friend to the athlete and maybe going out and drinking at night and doing all these things. And those two things clash when you're trying to carry yourself. If your athletes are seeing you out at the bar acting like a fool, and then you come in on Monday and you try to act like this professional coach, then they don't buy into you. It's not authentic. It's not who
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. And I think that's a hard part for younger coaches. Doesn't matter if strength coaches or not, but to really set that distinct line of I'm professional, and then you really have to follow through on that, and don't have like a good relationship with someone and you don't have one with somebody else. You have to have this professional relationship that maybe then ends after, like, when you go home, if that makes sense, that you're not like out partying with them and having
Right.
drinks, that you still professional and work with them, but that you're not in this group of players, even though they're the same age as you, that you don't have pick like favorites that are like that you maybe know you played against or whatever, that you're really on the coaching table and not somewhere in between.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think
Yeah,
you can still be yourself, you can still be young, you can still have fun, but you just got to really recognize that when you take on that coach role, you're taking on additional responsibility, and you have to carry yourself in a certain way, and
yeah.
that's important.
When we take a look at your current workplace in Alabama, how is the philosophy there in the coaching team, and in combination or in aspects to the players? How does that thing play out in the city or in your team? And also, additional question: you have known the coach, I think, a pretty longer in your career as a coach, maybe player. I'm not sure, but how does this relationship with him evolve over those years? And now, then, and the end point, let's say today, how's the philosophy with you, with him, and then also with the players there for you? This podcast is presented by Like Me, your partner for social media and online marketing from Weiden, and Praxis im Salzhaus, your contact for physiotherapy and health in Altenstadt.
Yeah, I think with being at my time at Alabama, I really focused on. I was brought in to kind of look at the culture and the player development piece and those types of things, and um, it shifted away from the weight room and the sports medicine side of things and those types of things. Coach Kalen DeBoer, is a good friend. We had uh, worked together early in our career. Then I worked for him for several years at multiple stops, and so I think his familiarity with me and what I was able to bring to the table from a team culture and those types of things is something that it went beyond the weight room. And I think that that's the key. I think that's the takeaway message from my experiences. Most recently at Alabama was um, I had developed a skill set that went beyond just the four walls of the weight room that is able to help somebody like Kalen DeBoer at one of the most premier places in the world in terms of sport. And I think that that's probably, again, the takeaway message for the coaches that are listening is my encouragement would be to make sure that you're developing yourself not just as a technician in the weight room, but you're also developing yourself as a manager of time, people, and resources. And you're developing an entrepreneurial spirit in that you're constantly sharpening the sword, you're constantly challenging your ideals, you're thinking outside the box, you're taking strategic risk, and you're not afraid to kind of do whatever it takes to move the needle forward a little bit, and so um, even though my time in Alabama was fantastic in that way, I think it's also been exciting for me to step away from Alabama and um, look at how I can make an impact on coaches around the world, um, in a way that is, that I'm able to touch more than the people that are in 105 people in a weight room that I deal with.
Mhm. So more of this entrepreneurship kind of way. It,
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship. I think is important in terms of like creating additional revenue streams and looking at it from a business lens. But I
mhm.
also think that it's important from a general curiosity that I think you have to have to continually grow um, in sport. And like when I was in college, I literally remember them putting a computer lab into our college for the first time. I mean, nobody really had a
Mhm.
personal computer or things like that. And now, like you can't operate a weight room without a computer or an iPad or something. And I think there's a lot of coaches that get stuck in their same type of programming. They get stay stuck with the same tools. They get frustrated by the process of trying to make improvements when maybe there's not a budget and those types of things, and they just throw their hands up. And for me, that's never been the case. I've always looked at obstacles like a wall, and if I can't, get through that wall, then I'm gonna back up and I'm gonna run through it, or I'm gonna take a jackhammer to it, or I'm gonna go around it, or I'm gonna go below it. I'm gonna find a way through that
Mhm.
wall. And I think there's too many coaches that just, they're not getting the job that they want. They're not getting the resources that they want. They're not getting this, that, or the other, and they play the victim card. And they just, it's because the profession isn't good enough, or my certifications aren't good enough, or they don't pay me, they don't pay me like they pay this position or that position. And our responsibility, because this is a field that's still very young, is to continue to grow it and show people and bring value and show people a pathway to get there. And
Mhm.
I think that's the biggest piece that most people fail is, I don't think, if you do a good job, there's probably not a boss out there that doesn't want to pay you more money. If you do a good job, there's not an organization out there that doesn't want to give you more responsibility. But they're looking at a pool of money, or a pool of resources that they have to allocate in various ways, and there's a lot of people pulling at that. And so learning business skills, learning how to frame things, learning how to think outside the box, and help solve that problem for them. That's how you're able to create a role like I did at Alabama, or um, different things. And I think that that's the key for growth in this field, is to help your bosses solve problems. And if you can do that um, with your bosses and your athletes, you're going to have a long career.
Mhm. I think it's a interesting topic what you touched on, that you're finding excuses, or your example with the wall. If the wall is there, then a lot of coaches might just stop at the wall and don't try to find a solution to get around or to get above it. And I think it's a example for that would be, because I recently got in a talk with someone, and the end point was that maybe the I want to get obviously in too much detail about it, but the, the talk was about that the weight room isn't good enough. We don't have equipment for, let's say, a monitoring system. We don't have this. We don't have that. Like, you in the US, everyone, I feel like, has a catapult system. We, for example, in hockey here in my team, we have First Speed. We have a coaching app for programming, but obviously not everyone has access to that. But there is still a possibility for the coaching team or the strength coach or everyone involved to make a program or to work on a high level without access to everything. And I think that's the thing what you said. You have to find a solution, and you have to maybe then work your ass off and work with the things you have, even if you don't have, let's say, kettlebells, you don't have dumbbells. You have to find a way to reuse other equipment, or to, okay, how can I then adapt my programming or adapt the plan to still have a positive and good outcome. And that's, I think, is a big hurdle that we have to take to evolve as a person, evolve as a coach. And then obviously we as coaches want to improve the athlete performance, for me on the ice and off the ice, for you then on the field and off the field. And I think that's a big step we have to take, and don't have to like back up,
Yeah,
because there's
I
always
could,
a solution, and you have to take the risk, and you have to really go that way and take that walk, because if you don't do it, then you never get better as a person or as a coach.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think, I mean, that first weight room when I was in Germany, it had a set of dumbbells and a couple barbells and plates, and that was about it.
Yeah,
I worked with an Olympic team in China that, they took out all the equipment in the weight room because they thought that I said that I didn't like it, and so they took it all out, and we had to train a team for a week without any equipment. And if I didn't have an understanding of time, tempos and time under tension and manual resistance and those types of things, we wouldn't have been able to train for a week. And so I think, instead of complaining about being in those situations as coaches, especially as a young coach, you should be looking at that as an opportunity for you to grow and think outside the box and develop a skill set that's adaptable, that I've had to do throughout my career. I mean, training through 9/11 or through a war or through COVID or through some of these different things, like those were things that you didn't expect, that weren't in textbooks when I learned to be a strength coach. You had to kind of adapt and think outside the box. And the more that you do that early in your career, the easier that becomes for you to be able to do that when you need to, you know. And I think that I some of my most creative solutions I still use to this day, even though I have a lot of resources available to me at this point.
yeah, right, 100%. Ron, thank you so much for joining me today on my podcast. I hope I got everything out that you could understand it. And um, on my side, thank you so much for the insights and some informations about you personally, for sharing some details and about your work. And I will try to find all the books and put it in the description. Obviously, also put your books, your podcast in the description. It was an honor talking to you. I learned a lot from you. So I'm really, really glad that you found the time and we could have a little talk together. Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the podcast, leave a rating or comment, and share it with someone who loves sports science. And for more content, follow me on Instagram at science_in_sports_. See you in the next episode.